did neglect to mention earlier that the postlude Alice has prepared for us today is exceptional, so it won't be a mistake to hang around for a few minutes after. Joy is not the same thing as happiness. You may have heard this before, perhaps from this very pulpit. But what do you think? Is there a meaningful difference in your life between what you experience as happiness and how you would describe joy? Paul's letter to the Philippians is often referred to as the epistle of joy. And it sort of exemplifies the difference between happiness and joy, because after all, as Paul writes this letter, he is in prison in Ephesus. He writes the letter of joy from prison. And yet, he is focused on this great joy that is to be found in the nearness of God, regardless of where one finds oneself, even in the midst of suffering. This is not a distinction without a difference for him or for us. It can't be. Not in this faith that is born in deep suffering. Not in this faith that has carried so many through times of hardship and pain and persecution. This is not a faith that would have lasted very long if it had to rely on happiness for sustenance. Resilience like that requires something deeper. Rejoice in the Lord always, Paul says. And I say rejoice again in case you missed it the first time. The Greek root behind the English translation that we heard today as be glad, it's rejoice in other translations, and also behind the word joy in the reading from John that we're going to hear shortly, takes us deeper than just a happy shout out. It connotes a gift of divine grace that is not based in a mere emotional reaction or outburst, but it springs from a soul satisfaction, a peace that exceeds all understanding, as Paul says. So our gospel reading today is from Jesus' farewell discourse in John, and it comes right after he describes himself as the vine and his followers as the branches, together producing a bumper crop of fruit to glorify God. Hear these words from John's Gospel. As the Father loved me, I too have loved you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy will be in you and your joy will be complete. This is my commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you. If you do what I say and remain in my love, abide in my love, live in my love, your joy will be complete. Total joy, fulfilling joy, enduring joy. And this from a man who was about to be tortured and executed, and who knew very well that his audience faced the same fate if they in fact remained in his love. The film Schindler's List, some of you will remember, was based on the true story of Oskar Schindler. He was a German businessman who ended up purchasing the lives of over 1,000 Jewish men and women who otherwise would have been killed in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. And in the film, one of the many poignant scenes shows when he and his accountant, Itzhak Stern, finished typing up the list of people to get out. And Stern holds up the list and he says, "The list is an absolute good. The list is life. All around its margins is the gulf." In that list resided the deep joy of goodness and peace in the midst of terrible, unspeakable inhumanity. For us Christians, joy is not a fleeting feeling, but the present reality of God's new creation breaking into the world. It's a robust, resilient hope that is grounded in the resurrection of Jesus, allowing us to experience gladness even amidst suffering and sorrow. Through the death and resurrection of Jesus, God's new creation has already begun. And joy is the foretaste that we get of the ultimate renewal that God has in store for all of creation. Even so, we tend to settle. It's been said that we are made for joy, yet we settle for pleasure. Joy on our Christian walk is a sign of a different way to be human in a world that so often is defined by selfishness and cynicism. And we humans are ingenious in coming up with new ways to fall back in on ourselves. Artificial intelligence, you may have heard of it, is becoming a dominant force in nearly every area of our lives. If the news and corporate investment are to be believed, it is going to come to define this era in a very short time. The logo for this year's stewardship campaign that you can see on your card, it was generated using AI, for example. It does wondrous things. And yet, there is a flip side to it, a dark side that can be very dark indeed. Apart from instantly generated logos, AI is also perfecting something called chatbots. Some of you may be familiar with that term already. These are programs that are designed to act as conversation partners with human users. And they are becoming more and more personalized and lifelike every day. And more people, many of them quite young, are turning them into personal companions. Now, in a culture that is suffering an epidemic of loneliness, at first glance, this may not seem like such a bad thing, really. Individuals who are isolated and who lack real-life relationships can find a consistent and attentive listener as close as their nearest device. It can be a way to manage social anxiety and to learn conversation skills for some folks. But these programs are written to respond to the wants and needs and desires of the individual user. Because, of course, to keep a customer, you have to keep them coming back, right? So these personal companion chatbots don't present the sorts of challenges that real-life interactions do. They learn from their user, and they build a personality that will aim to always leave their human user satisfied and affirmed and happy. Maya Angelou once said in an interview that joy is freedom. It helps a person to find their own liberation. But being shaped by a reflection of ourselves is not liberating. It is trapping us in a loop where we continually pursue and catch a deceptive facsimile of joy that is really anything but. Happiness depends on things going well. Joy is always available from a deeper well, independent of external events. Franciscan mystic Richard Rohr finds that joy comes from recognizing our ultimate unity with God and all of creation. We move beyond a separate, insecure sense of self and discover that we are part of something larger than ourselves that has existed since before time. For Christians, this is the body of Christ, into which we've been caught up through God's love and mercy and grace. At our best, the church is the body through which we are continuously renewed by that wellspring of joy that bubbles up as that peace that passes all understanding, as that love in which we abide with Christ. When our perception, which, as we have learned, is kingdom-oriented and Jesus-shaped and Spirit-led, when our perception is trained to recognize the difference, we will pick up on the contrast between happiness and joy pretty quickly. Happiness is triggered by external factors. If you're my wife, shopping at thrift stores. If you're me, who got caught up with fountain pens somehow during COVID, you learn a new acronym, NPD, New Pen Day. Or maybe it's a certain sports team getting a big win. Happiness. Joy springs from within, from a deep sense of purpose and meaning and gratitude. It's kind of like parents' experience. Parenthood, in and of itself, day to day, is not necessarily always a happy thing. But there is a deep joy that we find in it. Happiness is temporary and fleeting and depends on favorable but transitory, changing circumstances or events. Joy is enduring. It builds a foundation for all the rest of life. Happiness involves often an achievement, an accomplishment, a victory for the self, while joy is transcendent, reflecting a higher purpose and often a connection with others. Happiness is reactive. It's not about us making a choice, but about reflecting a feeling. Joy is responsive. It's intentional in how it views and relates to the world. Kate Bowler is a professor at Duke Divinity School who has been through the ringer herself and has turned her experience into a fount of wisdom for those of us who want to cultivate lives filled with joyful exuberance and endurance. She was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer at age 35. That she is now 45 years old is a testimony to both modern medicine and her remarkable resilience. And she has a great podcast if you're interested. Kate Bowler, like Bowler. Oddly enough, Her academic focus before she got sick was on the prosperity gospel, which is the religious belief system and economy that grows fat off of the message that a strong faith will lead to financial and physical blessings and well-being. Most of us pretend to laugh it off with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and all the rest that we see. But it is striking how easily we can fall into its grip ourselves. Don't we, after all, deserve health and wealth if we are good people? That is the allure of happiness over joy, right there. Kate, though, learned the hard way, and she now shares that hard-earned wisdom with us, that a truly joy-filled life embraces vulnerability, it acknowledges the struggle, and it finds connection in the midst of brokenness. We open ourselves to a joy-filled life when we are willing to be vulnerable and to share our anxieties and fears with a trusted community. Instead of trying to present a perfect life to the world. Our friends in recovery communities have a much better sense in general than we do in churches. They have a bunch of sayings that remind them of this over and over again, lest they forget. One of them is that we are only as sick as our secrets. We're only as sick as our secrets. Because what happens when we hold them in? What happens to ourselves? And what happens to our relationships with those around us? Another phrase that they often share at the very end of a meeting, when oftentimes they're holding hands, is, "It works if you work it, so work it because you are worth it." It works if you work it, so work it because you are worth it. Meaning to work the program. Ultimately, during this stewardship season for us at Littleton United Methodist, that's the idea behind why it is worth it to commit our time and talents and tithes to the life of this church family. Because this is the place where we are cultivating that trusted community where you can be who you are, warts, scars, and all. This is the place where we are working to make space for parents to raise children who are grounded in love and peace, not anxieties and fear. This is the place where we are working to make space for young disciples to build relationships with adult disciples who recognize that it takes intention to live lives of integrity and purpose. This is the place where we are working to make space for young adults to find support to grow as disciples in a culture that entices them daily to be consumers instead. This is the place for seniors to be empowered to live into their discipleship and embrace their spiritual gifts, because no one ever retires from their baptism. It is not easy to be church in 2025. But I'm convinced that there is one thing that makes it more difficult than anything else, if not impossible. It is if we are trying to do it without joy. Because it is only by tapping into the deep, abiding joy of Jesus Christ that we find the will and the way to move forward. It is only by tapping into that deep well that we access the living water for which this world is so terribly thirsty. May Littleton United Methodist Church, this church family, be a place where we drink deeply from that well of living water and then pass it around.